What's up, you guys? Adam here with Anabolic Climbing, and today it's time to scientifically demystify steroid dosages. We're going to go through the literature, we're going to go through a couple of the most frequently cited studies, one of which you've almost certainly heard. We're going to break it down, talk about what they tested, what they didn't test, the takeaways that we can make as both lifters and climbers, and we're going to then do some extrapolations and run that against some personal experience. So, if you guys like the kind of content that I'm putting together, please don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell. Helps the channel out tremendously. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So, the two studies in question are testosterone dose-response relationships in healthy young men and the effects of supraphysiological doses of testosterone on muscle size and strength in normal men. Both of these studies were done at UCLA Harbor, and we're going to go into both of them to figure out what lessons we can learn as climbers. So the first study, testosterone dose response in relationships in healthy young men, it had 61 participants, ages 18 to 35, divided into groups. Each was given a GHRP agonist to suppress their endogenous testosterone, and they were all given testosterone and anthate once a week. Those dosages were 25, 50, 125, 300, and 600 milligrams weekly. That's a lot. Or actually super little depending on which group you were in. The study tracked changes in sexual desire, muscle mass, hemoglobin, RBC, changes in HDL, and cognitive alterations to the participants. Please note that the participants had lifted before, but did not for the duration of the experiment. So no one was weight training during the duration of this experiment. All of this was based off of muscle, strictly driven by the testosterone itself. What wasn't tracked? Really most of the negative side effects that we associate with testosterone. And that could be acne, changes in body hair, changes in estradiol that could lead to things like bloating or gynecomastia. So, what did we find when we analyzed individuals at all of these various dosages? Well, let's go through the tables one by one, and we can go through some of the observable changes and see what takeaways matter for us. So number one, as far as the overall testosterone in nanograms per deciliter, I want to start by giving the healthy ranges for adult men in North America. And the normal range, at least in North America or the United States, is usually between about 300 to 400 to 800. The upper limit is around 1,000 nanograms per deciliter, but that's in very fringe cases. Usually if you're in the 250s, TRT is a reasonable prescription for you. The folks here, you can see their baselines at 593, 566, 553, 650, 632 respectively. So let's take a look at some of the jumps. On 25 milligrams, the first group went hypogonadal and went down to 250 nanograms per deciliter. The 50 milligram group went down to 306. The 125 group was interesting. They basically went from 553 to 570. But a note that when you're taking your testosterone exogenously, it's in a steady state. So you're not going to get the same peaks and troughs that you get with your natural testosterone, where your test would peak in the morning and subside throughout the day, or have issues with bad sleep, bad food, things like that. The 300 milligram group went supraphysiological at 1345 as the average over the 16 weeks. And to the surprise of no one, the 600 milligram group was above 2,000. So, yeah, that's what we're going to expect. Pretty dramatic change from baseline. They basically got about 4 times their baseline testosterone. So, none of these things are really surprising when we consider the dose-dependent response, but let's take a look at the changes in body mass. And this was done in, I want to say a dunk tank is how they did it. The 25 milligram group lost about a pound of muscle, or actually no, 1 kilogram of muscle, that's 2.2 pounds. 50 milligram group gained about 0.6. This is really the most interesting one, and I'm going to extrapolate on this toward the end of the chart. But the 125 milligram group, despite basically keeping steady state testosterone, or matching their original testosterone, gained about 3.4 kilos despite being on a TRT dose and not lifting. The 300 milligram group gained 5.2, and the 600 milligram group gained 7.9 kilograms of fat-free mass. Now, some of this could be glycogen, some of this could be tissue. Just so that we're clear, it's not necessarily all contractile tissue. But when we take a look at the 125 and the 300 milligram groups, these are guys that are gaining overall fat-free mass, and whether it's glycogen, water, or contractile tissue, we could basically use this as a proxy to when you are in extreme caloric deficits, as climbers are almost notoriously in chronic deficits, you'll find that eventually, if they get lean enough, their endocrine system will crash. And that you could expect to see the testosterone in the 200 to 300 milligram range. Ultimately, you'll see a lot of pro climbers sort of stay at that equilibrium where they're not getting any leaner, but they're still very lean and able to maintain athletic performance. On TRT, they could basically they could keep their baseline testosterone or potentially even increase their overall muscle mass in general while giving them clearance to get another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds leaner and get rid of some of that excess body fat, which is definitely a thing worth considering if you're trying to scratch the upper echelon of the sport, or if you just want to do testosterone because it's fucking fun. Obviously, there were some changes to HDL. Plasma HDL tended to go down in a dose-dependent manner, but interestingly enough, if you went hypogonadal like in the 25 milligram group, their HDL did improve, meaning testosterone is HDL damaging. Going into the leg press strength, also keep in mind, none of these folks worked out during the duration. The 50 milligram group actually saw similar gains to the 125 milligram group, which I find fascinating. That could just be an aberration. But there was a noticeable jump in terms of strength between the 125 and the 300 milligram group, from plus 18.4 kilogram increase on the leg press versus a 72 kilogram increase on the leg press, and 76.5 kilogram increase on the strength of the leg press on the 600 milligram group. So it seems like above 300 milligrams, you're going to get some level of diminishing returns as it relates to lifting to overall strength increase without training. Obviously, we were going to expect some increases in hemoglobin. In the hypogonadal groups of 25 and 50 milligrams, their overall red blood cell count went down about 7.4, whereas it went up 6.1 and 14.2 respectively for the 300 and 600 milligram groups. Yeah, the 125 stayed about even, although it was slightly higher. And of course, the IGF-1, which is one of the main drivers of overall growth and can also assist in collagen synthesis and drive that, was up 74 to 77 points on the 300 and 600 milligram group, but the 125 group actually, IGF-1 declined. Just so that we're all in alignment here, both groups were having both groups were in a calorie surplus to being at a caloric maintenance. Lean mass accrual was dose dependent, but the gain saw diminishing returns around 300 milligrams. Again, this is a study that's done without training and being at a calorie maintenance or a slight surplus. The side effects were also dose dependent, and that's something that I want us to be eyes wide open on. But also keep in mind that one of the participants had to drop out due to severe acne. And if you're acne prone, that is definitely a thing that can be exacerbated by exogenous testosterone. And by the study's own admission, we saw diminished strength returns at the 600 milligrams. And also, androgens seemed to be safe at least in 20-week periods at the 600 milligram range. So, from a safety profile, could somebody run a 600 milligram cycle and then cycle off without severely damaging health impacts? According to the study, they say yes. Would it take time to restart your endocrine system? Yes. Would you keep most of those muscle gains when you come off the exogenous testosterone? No. But from a longevity perspective, it seems to be relatively benign in this dosing and duration. So if you were to run 600 milligrams for 20 weeks, it seems like it wouldn't have severe impacts on health. And when we look at my blood work personally from the last 9 months, being between 300 to, at the high end, 500 milligrams of androgens, even though I was only on 500 milligrams of androgens for a couple of weeks, blood work always looked good. Let's go on to the most infamous study that everyone talks about, the effects of supraphysiological doses of testosterone on muscle size and strength in normal men. This is the study where all the natties baby rage, because they had 41 participants. Hold on, I'll make myself slightly smaller here. Should have done this before. And it was divided into 4 groups. The no exercise, no testosterone group, the no exercise testosterone group with 600 milligrams of test and anthate, then the exercise group with no test, and the exercise group with test. And then they observed the changes in body composition. So everyone always baby rages about this study because it showed over a 10-week period that enhanced people that sat on the couch accrued more muscle in 2.5 months than folks that lifted in a pretty vigorous lifting routine. Good times. So let's go over it, shall we? The differences between the testosterone group and the placebo. Over the 10 weeks, the body weight of the placebo of the folks that didn't exercise they gained 2.2 pounds. On testosterone, they gained about 3.5 kilos, so about 7 pounds of contractile tissue. The exercise group, big yikes, gained about 0.9 pounds of contractile tissue, which, for 2.5 months of training is actually really good. Whereas the test group put on about 12 pounds, which is not surprising in the least. Then it goes through the differences in fat-free mass, where again, you can see the testosterone group actually recomping and adding about 3.2 kilograms of fat-free mass. Some of that could be glycogen, some of that could be contractile tissue, some of that could be water. Obviously the testosterone group that exercised gained about 5 kilos. That's not really much of a surprise. And, the same things were reported as far as differences in HDL, SHBG, red blood cell counts, triglycerides, things of that nature. None of that should really be surprising us, but there's kind of a couple things that we could take away from this. Number one, simply going on tests will allow you to become a stronger climber. It doesn't make you a better climber, but it will make you a stronger climber. And number two, drugs are never a substitute for training, but there are acute strength changes that are worth mentioning. And obviously the noting of worsening of LH, FSH, HDL, RBC, and triglyceride markers. So would I expect an increase in tendon strength for the second study of people that just took tests and sat on the couch? No, I expect it would be more injury prone at the end of that. If you're exogenously getting strength from outside compounds without doing any work to really bulletproof the areas that you tend to be working out, I do think that makes you more injury prone. On the other hand, if you're leveraging it with exercise and diet, I do think that it could give you a more protective, or it could be more protective to muscles, both in terms of the muscles in your arms, shoulders, back, but also to the muscles in your hands. I think if you're doing a lot of finger training and you're only doing it once or twice a week, I do theorize that exogenous testosterone is protective to keeping the strength and therefore being less damaging to the tendons overall, because if you're only doing that once or twice a week, it's entirely possible that you're regressing from session to session. And that's why it's harder to grind out more gains as you get stronger, and why having the stimulus 3 times a week is going to yield more gains than just once a week. And I think if you've ever lifted and done a bro split of doing any body part once a week, you sort of hit a plateau where volume is required to hit a muscle group twice a week or 3 times a week if you want it to grow as a natural. Whereas if you're on exogenous testosterone, that's less of an imperative. So, takeaways. Testosterone is obviously muscle protective, and exogenous testosterone is helpful both in terms of treating sarcopenia and for folks that are looking to retain muscle on a TRT protocol. Interestingly, subclinical levels of testosterone is deleterious to muscle, and that was proven in the first experiment. Awesome to see that clinically on paper. And higher doses does drive strength in a dose-dependent manner with diminishing returns after around 300 milligrams. It could potentially be less, by the way, but that's just what we were measuring with these specific studies. Side effects, to the surprise of no one, are also dose-dependent. While health markers were all in the range and tolerable for all participants in 20 weeks, additional steps are needed to really handle some of the upper tolerable doses. So you got to keep your estradiol in check. If you're prone to hair loss, which a lot of folks are, even though I'm super grateful to not suffer with that ailment, throwing on some topical minoxidil or potentially finasteride or dutasteride is a thing worth considering if you're not running DHT derivatives. I use a topical dutasteride as well as a topical minoxidil. That seems to be doing just fine for me. And yeah, just to reiterate, the sweet spot for strength gains seems to be at around the 300 to 400 milligram per week range. It does not generate as much muscle, but it is still just as protective of the contractile tissue, even in a deep caloric deficit. 600 milligram doses, I do think, can be leveraged safely, as both studies sort of conclude. And I think it is worth considering for a dose-dependent response around projecting, especially if you've been training the entire time leading up to it. If you've been training hard for a year and you want to up the doses, or rather, if I'm training hard for a year and I want to up the doses prior to a project, that's a thing I might do. But I don't think it's necessary to run 600 milligrams year round. The other thing that I'm going to extrapolate, but I feel pretty strongly about, is whether it's 600 milligrams of testosterone or 200 milligrams of testosterone, and whether you want to run some Anavar, some Equipoise, some Masteron, some Primobolan, pick your poison, right? How you choose to get the 600 milligrams of androgens is up to you. How you choose to manage that is up to you. But I suspect similar impacts to strength and size will be happening. Obviously, some compounds are more anabolic than others. Looking at the 19 NORs, they might put on more contractile tissue and be worse for overall tendon development. But if these are things that folks want to experiment with, it's their body, their choice. Personally, I tend to lean more toward the DHT derivatives. That's the Masteron and Primobolan, because they tend to be a little bit safer, and even though they're worse on the hairline, that's not a thing I suffer with. I think Equipoise is a thing I'm going to try out this year. We'll figure that out as a mechanism of managing estrogen. But if there are folks that are afraid of getting big, these studies do really hint that 125 to 150 milligrams might be optimal for maintaining muscle mass while being in severe deficits. So if I were to speculate what would be best for some of the climbers like the Will Boseys or the Stefano Gisolfis, folks that really rely on being ultra light, perhaps a lower dose of testosterone would be beneficial to a protocol a climber like that might opt to. Whereas for folks that are used to being bigger and stronger, a la a Yves Graval or a Kai Leitner, in the event that they wanted to get a little saucy, a climber like that could potentially tolerate more of an androgenic load, especially since they have higher muscle mass. Anyways, these are my takeaways from the specific studies, as well as some of my extrapolations. Either way, I'm back from Japan. Off season is done. Back on the Retta and gonna lose a little bit of weight over the course of December. I will be getting some blood work done this week as well. Gonna be submitting that to you guys to see how bad my A1C got over the course of Thanksgiving in Japan. Your boy ate a boatload of bread and pastries, but I missed you guys, and I'm stoked to be back in the gym, stoked to be back here with you guys, making content, reading studies. If you enjoy it, again, do not forget to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell. I appreciate that a lot. Discord is in the link below. As always, I'm Adam with Anabolic Climbing, wishing you good luck, happy sending, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.